Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. I've got Josh Littauer here. He is helping families build generational wealth through faith, leadership, and discipline. Three things I love. But he is a Christian, first and foremost, a husband, money coach, and a former engineer, which Josh and I really relate on that because, as y'all know, I'm still an engineer right now, but he has actually made his way out of engineering, which maybe I'm a little envious about, but no, I'm very excited that he has made it out of that world, and to be able to help people full time with money. So we'll get in this
Yep.
episode a little bit about money and about his aspirations to get on podcasts and on stages and what he's doing to get there to be able to help you, the listener, be able to get better at all three of those. So, Josh, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, well, man, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. You and I have built a relationship over the past couple of years, and so I'm excited that you're continuing to grow and you're getting yourself out there. And I love what you're doing with this community and helping to build, helping people, whether they already have a podcast, continuing to grow that, or maybe putting themselves out there and really starting to build a brand. It's kind of where I'm at in a way too. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So I appreciate what you're doing for the community. But yeah, so I'm excited to come to you guys. I have gone through over the past couple of years, even since Philip and I have met, my career has done a little ups and downs in a way. I was in the engineering field for several years, and then started building a personal finance company along the way. Is really my big thing with that is I love people. I love helping people. I really want to see other people go out and win and let all their goals and dreams to come true. And so for me, money was a big part of that, and helping to understand how basic financial concepts can really help teach you grow your personal situation right now and really affect change for the long run, really leaving a legacy for your family. And so I was fortunate enough that as we got our business built up, I was able to exit an engineering career. So I was able to replace what I was already doing on the engineering side. And so I'm super grateful to get to do what I do now, is to just sit down and help teach people how money works and then put them in a better position to win. So it's been awesome.
Mm. And that is awesome. And we talked about this offline, but I really want you to bring up and maybe go a little bit more detail on that plan. So how did you execute that? Because I know through this whole transition, you got married and then you end up moving. And so you had a lot of different hurdles. And of course, you were dealing with COVID kind of through all that, which we know how crazy and stupid that's been. But you were dealing with all of these different obstacles and hurdles throughout all of this transition. So how did all of
Yeah.
that play a factor in the transition?
Well, I think a big thing, and this can kind of be a theme for really making progress in any area of your life, but you really have got to make a decision towards what it is that you're going to accomplish. I think so many of us, we make like these half-hearted decisions where it's like, oh yeah, like even the example of starting a podcast, which you and I are going to talk about, but it's like, oh yeah, it would be a good idea to start that. And like you fiddle with it, but then you don't get serious about it. And I was that way with my personal finance business, and that like, hey, I love helping people, but like it makes an extra couple $1,000s a month, but it's not like I'm not replacing a big six-figure salary yet. But what the switch flipped for me is when I made that decision. I said, "Hey, I'm taking this full time. I'm really gonna get after it. I'm gonna put some feet to the fire, and we're gonna go out and make that happen." And truthfully, once we made the decision to go out and make that transition happen, I don't want to say that it wasn't challenging, because it required a lot of effort. It required a lot of hours, and it required a lot of focus, but it was also totally possible, right? And it was possible, just like you said, in a season where my wife and I were getting married. She actually moved from Dallas down to Houston for a season. At the same time, we bought and built a house. I left engineering. We moved back up to the Dallas area. We were traveling. I mean, I think we each were traveling somewhere. We were hopping on planes once a month. Like we were just all over the place. But the big thing came back to us like, hey, we made the decision. This is what we're going to do. So we've just got to stick to the plan. And if we can continue to execute on that plan, we know it's going to happen, right? And so it took from basically a year, from September of 2020 to September of 2021, for me to have built my business up on the side enough that I replaced a full six-figure salary doing that to be able to make
Wow.
that. So
Man, that's crazy. That stinks. You built the house in Houston and then you had to leave that house you just built and everything.
Well, built the house up in Dallas. So we
Oh,
moved, we
okay,
were in an
okay.
apartment in Dallas, in Houston, and built a house up in Dallas, and then moved up there. So
Gotcha. Okay, well, that's
that's
good you didn't
awesome.
have to leave
That's
that
awesome.
house you built in Houston. That would have really stunk.
That would have
That
sucked. That would have
but
sucked.
that's
So,
still, I mean, that's even harder because I know my wife had built a house right before we got married, and it was literally right across the street from her parents' house. So it really wasn't a big deal. But having a house being built 4 or 5 hours, depending on where you're at in
yeah.
Houston and where you're at in Dallas,
Yep.
that's a long ways away to have something being built that you can't really just go watch, every day
Yep.
and see it actually being built right. And you have to go up there, because I'm sure y'all went up there to inspect it to make sure things looked right, and you had just what you wanted in there and everything as well. So that's, I mean, that a lot of things going
Yeah.
on all at the same time. So I have to commend you on that. And really, at the end of the day, the discipline that you had behind sticking to that plan. But
Yeah.
how did y'all go about building that plan? What did that look like? And I'm gonna ask more on that relationship side. How did that
Yeah.
planning look like for y'all? And I guess obviously you're just giving us maybe the perspective of what you think it looked like for Morgan,
Yeah.
but what did that look like for y'all?
Yeah, so my wife lives up in the Dallas area. We've got a great church that we're planted at up here. So I actually, while we were dating and engaged, I drove from Houston to Dallas every weekend to make sure that we were together. In fact, between the time that we met in January of 2020 and the time we moved back up to the Dallas area, I did 80, I think it was like 83 trips back and forth between Houston and Dallas, which is crazy. Don't recommend it. Um, so, but we had always said it as part of the plan when we got married was we were going to end up living back up in the Dallas area, and I knew that in order for that to happen, I was going to have to leave engineering.
Mhm.
And so when we mapped out a plan, and this comes where a little bit where I've helped quite a few people map this out too, is if you're gonna leave a career and start a business, there's a couple of things that have to be in place. For one, you've got to understand just financially what is the necessary cash flow, like how much money are we going to need to make on a monthly basis to replace what we're doing now, still be able to live, hopefully like maintain your lifestyle, not have to worry, like when you lose a normal, regular income, because the entrepreneur world does this number, right? Goes up and
Mhm.
down a little bit. So
Yeah, very
if you've
roller
got
coaster like.
exactly. But so we mapped out, and I'm a big spreadsheet guy. I mapped it all on a spreadsheet and said, hey, here's the cash flow we need to have. Here's what we need to have in savings. Here's what we need to be, X, Y, and Z. And so my wife, what I love about my wife, I love a lot of things about her. But one of the things that I really love about her is she is very much like, hey, if this is the dream and the vision, I will support it, whatever that takes, like whether that's, hey, we're going to cut expenses and not spend extra money here, or I'm going to get behind you and, help support your business by sending you clients and by sending you, people for your business, or, even just cheering me on when I've had a rough day and I come home and I'm like, that was a day sucked. That was not good, and she
Mhm.
can come up and pick me up and be like, hey, like this is the vision and this is the dream and this is where we're continuing to go. So I think from a relationship standpoint, the big thing with that was like I needed to effectively communicate. Here's the vision. Here's how this vision benefits you. Here's the life that you're going to get to have because I'm out building this vision. And then she can very easily say, like, I buy into that vision too, and I'm just going to come alongside you, and I'm going to help push you so that vision can come true, because it's obviously going to benefit both of us. So, but it's a lot of tough conversations along the way. It really is, and it takes a lot of communicating. And I think that's things that a lot of couples struggle with, is effective communication when laying out a plan and a vision for their life.
That's so true, and I love that you mentioned that she came along and supported you as well. But you also brought her in on talking about that plan. It wasn't just like you had this plan, this great idea, what you were going to do, and while yes, it was going to benefit her in the end, you still brought her in to say, "Hey, look, what do you think we can do?" and had her buy in on that. And that's something I think, especially as us men, we want to be that provider. We don't think about, and we don't think about bringing our wives in on that conversation. We're like, okay, this is what I got to do. Got my spreadsheet out, and you just start executing, because that's what we do as guys. We just
Yep.
execute. We figure it out as we go. We don't make the plan necessarily. We just go and we figure it
Right.
out as we go. And
Right.
I don't know, my wife, that kills her that things won't be going right. And I'm like, yeah, cool. We're doing it. We're moving forward or whatever in any situation. And she's just like, how are you not stressed out? I'm like, no, this is life. And that's kind of goes back to engineering. I'm sure you dealt with that too, where a problem came up and you just had to figure it out. You had to figure out how to fix it. And then of course, figure out what happened in the first place so you can go back and fix that as well. So it wouldn't happen again. But I love that you did bring your wife in on that the whole plan and everything. And I
Yeah.
appreciate you bringing that up. What are you
Yeah.
saying?
Well, I think it's important, when you're married to somebody, right? Like that's your life partner. That's the person you're going to go through all of life with. So it's like, what happens is a lot of times, if there's not real alignment on the vision, is one person's going to start to do this and the other person may be running straight, but it's like, hey, if we don't understand where we're both going, it's hard to go there together.
Mm-hmm.
And even if your spouse isn't like my wife she is right next to me, and behind me and like pushing, like, you can do this, like you're going to be great, like you're building a future for our family, like, but not every spouse is that way. Some spouses are like, hey, like, cool, like you just tear it up and like go do your thing, like I'll be over here. And then there's others that are like, I think this is stupid, like this is crazy, like there's no need to do this. But I think it's a continual, like as a guy, it's learning, how do I effectively communicate the whole reason why we're doing something, and then bringing them in and saying like, hey, here's how this is going to benefit you. Here's like how you can be a part. Like, here's how we can still be together as a family while building our business. And like, there's that conversation has to happen in order for that level of alignment, to really push you forward. So it's an important part of the conversation is bringing a spouse in.
Yeah, man. And so you mentioned about the cutting expenses and the budgeting and everything. And obviously you're very much about budgeting with being the money coach and everything. So how does somebody go about budgeting or funding a side hustle until they can make it their main thing? What does that look like? And obviously it's different for everybody, but what are some tips that you can give us on that?
Yeah, one of the big things. So in today's world, nobody's saving nearly enough money. It just is. It's just part of the reality that we're facing right now. And this is even true before the past 18 months or so. I've inflation over the past 18 months. I mean, like a gallon of gas has more than doubled in price. Like even regular stuff at the grocery store is going up like crazy. We can't control that, right?
Mhm.
But in preparation for things like inflation and emergency expenses, we can save more money, right? And so some of that may be in bank accounts, some of it may be in investment accounts, or not even necessarily retirement, but things that you can access. And especially if you're in the position where it's like, okay, I want to leave my full-time job and then get into a side hustle of some kind. What you've got to figure out is how much money do I need to have saved up that if all of my income went away, I would still be able to survive, right? Having that emergency fund on hand. And then as you're looking at building your business, it's coming up with, hey, if I'm making, let's say just easy numbers, let's say I'm making $5,000 a month and I need this to live on, but my side hustle only produces 1,000.
Mhm.
So for right now, I'm going to stuff away this extra 1,000 so that I can build up that emergency fund. But then along the way, it's how quickly and how do I scale my $1,000 a month in side hustle to bring it up to match what I'm already doing on the full time. And if I can do that, then what I do is I transition what I live off from my full-time income, and that all goes to directly to savings. So I've got that stored up. And by the time that you're ready to jump ship, no big deal. You've got an emergency fund built up. Your business is built up enough on the side that it's going to continue to carry you on, despite the fact that you may not have the regular income like you did before.
So I don't need to start putting that money into crypto and NFTs and all that stuff.
Here's what I say about cryptos and NFTs. I think there's a ton of opportunity there. I think you really have got to know what you're doing and do your research. And because everything is still so volatile right now, I still think it's a gamble. So whatever money you put into your cryptos and NFTs, just be willing and like ready that you could lose all of it. Okay. So I still think there's a lot of opportunity. A lot of people are like 100%, that's where all my money's going. I'm like, I don't recommend that. Put some money towards it because you never know when you may hit a home run. But in general, let's not put all of our portfolio into, new emerging markets like that.
All right. But along this journey, and I want you just kind of say the answer essentially, but do you think that we should be focused on building up that side hustle, become the equal to the main hustle, and then obviously become the main hustle, or that, and I guess that's where I was kind of going, like, or should we kind of dabble in other things at the same time? As far as
There's,
NFTs, cryptos, also saving, but then finding other ways to invest to bring in more money, or focus
yeah,
on that one business.
yeah, it's a good question. I think here's part of the problem with most of us as Americans is we're distracted so easily that a lot of times when you get pulled and distracted in multiple directions, you get spread so thin that nothing becomes successful. Like you'll be an average crypto investor, you'll be an average, let's say your side hustle is I don't know what to say. Let's say you're building wood tables on the side, right? And like you'd be average at that, and you end up being average all the way across the board, and nobody who did anything average truly became something great.
Mm.
So for me personally, like I obviously had like my normal investing and things like that as we were making the transition, but I was also stuffing away cash and savings. And then I put as much effort as I possibly could towards building my business. Because at the end of the day, you may hit some home runs with some of these other things that you want to focus on, like cryptos and NFTs. But even if you hit a home run there, if you absolutely hit rock bottom, but your business isn't built up, then what are you sitting on, right?
Mm.
So my recommendation is go as hard as you can in building your one thing until it is more than sustainable and until it's producing the life that you want, then start dabbling in some other things on the side.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I appreciate you really being spot on with that and saying that directly. I think sometimes we don't think about that, and of course, social media has really killed that for us to be distracted by everything. And here's the new hot thing. Let's try and go after that. And like you said, that's a great analogy, going for those home runs and only going after the home run. And while obviously that does get you a score, it can make you tons and tons of money, it's not likely that you're going to hit that. More often than not, the people that are successful, like, using the baseball analogy, are those ones that always consistently hit a double, or single, double, maybe even a triple, but they're always just getting on base and they're able to move around the bases versus having to make that one swing to be able to just go around every base.
Right. Well, I use this analogy often with people. Some of the things that we utilize, some of the tools we utilize in our business, in our industry, like investing tools, have a floor where there's a cap, there's a cap on the floor. So basically it says, I'm not ever going to lose money. But then you're still going to grow with the market. And people are like, well, I'm probably not going to like hit a huge home run. Like I want 100% return. I'm like, okay, you may not get 100% return, but here's what you do get. It's like playing baseball, just like you said. Somebody else may be able to hit home runs and grand slams, but they can also strike out and fly out and ground out. But if I'm always hitting doubles, singles, and triples, but can never strike out or ground out or fly out, who's going to end up winning the game?
Yeah.
I will, right?
Yeah.
Because I never get out. Every at bat, I'm on base. I can't lose,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's how I view it a lot of ways. And when you're going out and building your business, that's really how it is. Like you may just be getting singles or doubles along the way, but eventually the score is going to show you're going to end up winning in the long run. So just stick to the game plan, and just keep giving yourself more at bats.
Love it, man. So I do want to make a transition here now. Appreciate you helping us out, talking about money, talking about your journey going through to becoming solely the money coach, only that, and not being the engineer.
Yeah.
But I know we've talked about this, and you might have to be a little bit vulnerable with us on this, but we've talked about this a little bit, about you wanting to start a podcast. And what's that desire behind wanting to start that podcast?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, and again, I think this is not in an arrogant way, but I know what value that I bring to the people around me. And I know that message should be given to other people. I think some of my life experiences have yielded in me a story that's worth telling, and some analogies along the way. They're going to help people improve their life and then really grow in their life. And so part of my desire is just to help other people, continue to see growth in their life, to be an encouragement, to be somebody who is a voice of peace and strength at the same time, to help other people improve their life. And so that's a lot of the desire. That's why I feel like having a podcast, is something that I'd like to do. But And I'm selfishly too, I also know it's good for brand exposure, so
Mhm.
I know that,
Oh
I know
yeah.
that part too.
Yeah, man, and it's awesome, and just us being able to talk here about the budgeting, for instance, with us talking about this, I'm getting to be able to learn about that, but of course, the audience as well. So it is kind of selfish. You can get people on the podcast that can help you learn. There was another person I talked with. He was a marketer, and we spent probably 15 or 20 minutes afterwards talking about marketing, and he was helping me out and giving me some stuff. So it's like really cool how you can make those connections like that. So the podcast is great for brand awareness. It's great to be able to help people out. But yeah, it is a little selfish and you get to help yourself out as well. But you don't get that opportunity if you're not giving back more than you're taking in. So, and
Yep.
that's really anything in life, but
Yep.
definitely. But what's holding you up from doing that? That's what I really want to dive into here is what is holding you up from not doing that podcast? Because I know you have it in you. Obviously, you saying that you have the confidence to do it. I know you have the know-how. You're a smart guy, obviously being a former engineer, and now you know about money, which seems like a lot of people aren't very smart in that either. So it's something great that you could possibly talk about. I'm not sure if that's all that you would want to talk about on there, but what is holding you back from starting that podcast?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think some of it is, it's not a fear of anything as much as it's just a lack of focus on.
Mm,
It's like I said before, when I made the commitment to leave engineering, I knew what it was going to take to build that business.
mm,
So I think my decision so far in having a podcast is that would be nice. Like that would be cool to do. It's not like I'm building a podcast. So I think there's a big gap in the amount of focus in, saying like, okay, this is the plan. This is how we're going to build it. And then this is going to be the outcome. So I think that's something that I need to dial in is figure out what is the actual game plan for building it. That way it's not just hey, if I happen to record an episode here or there, it happens and nothing really beneficial ever happens for the audience or for me.
That's such a good point. And I think a lot of people fail to realize that. And I forget, I should know the statistic, but the statistic is like I think 90% of podcasts don't make it past the 10th episode or something like that because I think they don't realize how much it's going to take, or they expect that they're going to be like a Joe Rogan download somehow when they are only in the first 10 podcast episodes, which
Yeah.
it's not going to happen. You're going to have maybe a few friends that really listen to it, to be honest, for those of you
Yeah.
out there thinking about starting one. But that should not be the reason why you start that podcast. It should be more about the why behind it, why you're doing that. Because I know, Josh, like we just talked about, while yeah, it's going to help with lead gen, while it's going to help you be able to learn, and it's going to be something cool for you to do, that's not why you were doing it. You're wanting to start it to help somebody out and really having that plan. So let's kind of dive through that. Maybe this will help you actually start that podcast. What could that plan look like for you to get started, and what are some of the things that you think you need to work through before you could start that podcast? Because I mean, I understand, need to have some kind of game plan instead of just kind of going into it and winging it, and then, oh man, there's so many other things I didn't realize. So
Yeah.
what are some things that you can kind of plan out, or you think you need to plan out?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I prepped myself for this conversation a little bit because I was like, man, he's going to ask me like, what would be your vision for it, or like, what would be like a topic you wanted to like really talk about, and all along my life, I've believed that like you can have everything in life that you want,
Mm,
and what that means, like you can have the body you want, you can have the money you want, you can have the faith with God that you want, you can have a great marriage, you can have a great family. So I believe that you could have all of the things that you want out of life. But what that requires is really learning how to be excellent in more than one area. And
mm,
so I recently, over the past about year and a half, I've had some mentors and people who have entered my life. Pastor Keith Kraft, who's actually our pastor down here at church, who showed me for the first time that you could have all of those things simultaneously. I didn't grow up that way. I grew up thinking like you can have a great marriage and a great family, but you can't have money, right? Or you can have
mm-hmm,
money, but you
mm-hmm.
can't have a good family. Like, so now that I have a better representation of that, I think I would love to build a podcast and an audience around the idea of creating and building excellence into every area of your life, and then being able to be an example of that. And so that's something from a vision and like topic, we would talk about fitness a little bit. We talk about finances. We talk about faith. We talk about relationships and marriage. So I would build it a lot around the idea of being excellent in every area of your life.
Mm, I love that idea, man. And I know you're a fan of Stewman, right? Or I'm pretty sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's what he talks about a lot, build the most elite version of yourself. So it reminds me a lot of that, but that's so true. And I think so many people, and I know there's times we talked about this at the beginning where you need to focus on something specifically, but that's what you do. You start focusing on that one area. Once you get that down, once you get those habits in place to keep that up and really that system and that process in place, then you move on to the next thing and you build up that process and those systems. And the next thing is you have to start really almost automating things. And this is actually kind of going back to what we talked about with marriage and everything. One thing I've done is my wife is in a CRM. Customer retention management, whatever CRM is actually for. But I put her in there to make sure that, hey, I go buy flowers, or I, maybe send her a text in the middle of the day if I haven't done it in a while or whatever. But is we can go through the motions, and of course I know she knows I love her, and she loves me back, but I want to make sure that I'm doing things, or like make sure I put like massages in there and stuff like that, or just try and make sure that I'm doing these random acts of kindness. And you may think that, okay, this is, and we're going off on a little tangent here, but oh well. But you may think that, well, that's not very genuine, but it was when I set that plan in motion. And so it's the same thing for you on your business. It
Yep.
was your intention. You were very intentional about that and putting that process in place. So I like that, man. I think that would be a great thing to talk about. And you could have so many different people on the podcast. They'll talk about that. I mean, you're part of Arte, and obviously around Stewman and Apex and everything. So you've got so many people you can talk to about how they're becoming excellent. And even if it's broken down into just one area, how do they get excellent in that one area? You could talk about that. And I
Well,
really admire your marriage with Morgan as well. Even though I know y'all are only just over 1 year into it, I still admire how y'all's marriage is and how you've talked through things like that. It's very, even though it's young, to me, it's a very matured marriage still, because there's a lot of couples have been married for 30, 40 years that don't even have the conversations that y'all have had. There's
yeah.
so many things you go with that.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Would you more recommend focusing on one topic and then building the rest of them in after? Or would you say like start from the precipice of like, we're going to talk about excellence in these 5 areas. And that's the whole basis of the podcast, is learning how to be excellent in 5 areas? Or do you say like it's built around, like what I do for work, for like a living, more on the basis of like, here, how to get your financial home in order and be excellent here, and then start adding in the other areas?
So I think it depends on what you're wanting to go for at the end of it. So you want it to be more of like a lead gen towards your money management business, or are you want it more just to help reach people and help people out?
I mean, it really, at the end of the day, I want to end up reaching a lot of people.
Hmm.
I think as a natural byproduct, some of that will turn into lead gen specifically for my business, but
Yeah.
the intent wouldn't be just to do a money podcast, right?
Yeah.
I think I could do that, but that's not the overall intent. I think it'd be really more like how I really want to serve the community.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I totally get that. So you're definitely wanting to do more than just that. So I think you, like you said, you could still make that into a lead gen, but for me, I would probably focus on a few areas for yourself. So if you're doing solo episodes, you focus in on whatever those, maybe say 5 pillars or whatever you want to call it, what those 5 areas are that you talk about, and that's what you as in Josh talk about on that podcast. But then what you could do, and you could go either way, and you kind of have to fill it out, and it just depends on how well the guest is. But
Mhm.
depending on the guest, sometimes you can go into multiple areas and talk about multiple things, but a lot of times, especially for the audience, it's a little bit more beneficial to kind of go into one area, maybe briefly talk about all the areas that your guest is excellent in, But then if you go and dive into one area specifically, so if I was interviewing you on my podcast and I had this excellence podcast, we talked about like, hey, what are all the areas you're excellent in? But then I would go and talk about money because that's what you do as a full-time thing. Not that you're not excellent in the other areas, right? But
Right.
for me interviewing you on my excellence podcast, I would talk about money because that's where you're going to bring the most value for my audience, but then I'm also helping bring that value back to you. So it'd be the
Yeah.
same thing for you on your excellence podcast, is where you would go and find different people you want to talk to. And if they fit in those 5 pillars or one of those 5 pillars, that's awesome. I think that's the best way to do it. But if they have to be a little outside of it, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing either, because it's always good to see that outside perspective.
Right.
And I actually did that on a previous podcast when I was doing a health and fitness podcast, and I had a girl that was in the cannabis industry, and I'm not into that. That's not my thing. And so I kind of prefaced that like, hey, this is kind of uncomfortable for me because I'm not into this. I don't really believe in, partaking in that stuff, but I wanted to bring on this different perspective to talk about that, just to give a different perspective and see what the other side looked at. So you could
Yeah.
preface things like that, but I think to really help out your podcast the most, that you are going to build.
Yeah.
I'm speaking it out there for you, but
Right.
really just focus on those key pillars and more for yourself, but then have your guest that comes on really focus into one area that makes them excellent, so people can actually understand that, versus being very general and talking about all the areas that they're excellent. That way they can really dive into that one and talk about that process.
Yeah. Totally. Well, I think that's smart. I think that's smart too, is, and I would want to build out a process for bringing on guests and things like that specific to some of those areas. But yeah, so I think that as a part of it is nailing down what does that structure look like so
Hmm.
that I can create the game plan that I really want.
Mm. Yeah, and that's very smart to do that. That way you can really have that really fine-tuned thing in. And I know one thing for podcasts that really help them get ranked is to have a lot of episodes lined up right at the beginning as well, which I'm sure you'll think about on your roadmap to getting there and getting that podcast going, is having several episodes lined up for people to listen to. And then is of course downloads, and the ratings and reviews are the big things that Apple Podcasts and all other podcasts
Mm.
platforms are looking for when you do that. So if you can get a bunch right there at the beginning, that helps out a ton with the algorithms that are behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So very cool. But I do want to ask real quick. I know you've been on a couple stages as well. What does that journey look like to get on those stages, and then the podcast too, but just podcast, being on an actual physical stage, speaking in front of a crowd? What has that journey looked like? And how was that kind of overcoming that fear of being in front of people and talking?
Yeah, somebody actually asked me this the other day. I've gotten a chance to speak in front of anywhere from a small room of a dozen people up to we got a chance. My wife and I spoke in front of our church a couple weeks ago. So it's, I don't know, 2,500 or so people there.
Wow.
So we got that chance, but I think a lot of it's almost like my life has prepped me for it in a way, in a lot of the areas of life that I've been in, whether it started with like sports and being a captain on the team, where like I was frequently addressing the team and getting to talk to the team. Same in my business career, even early on, as being in a position of leadership. So it's like I've always been up in front of people talking, and so I'm fairly comfortable with it. Having a microphone in my hand was new, because normally I'm in a room small enough that I can just project and the whole room can hear me. So having a microphone and like having to use that was definitely new. But for me, our business. So I'm a part of a much larger organization too. So I have my personal business, but we're under the umbrella of WealthWave. And our WealthWave organization is about 10,000 agents across the country. So there's a lot of us. So I've gotten some opportunity to speak for our team and our organization around the country a little bit, and so that's been very cool. It's been great to get to be a part of that and get to speak on some of those stages. So I'd love to do more of it. I really do enjoy it. And similar to the podcast, it's like if I can bring some value to some of our team, directly here in the financial industry, then I think that'd be a cool opportunity.
Awesome. And I want to ask, which one was, I guess, more scary for you, being in the room with just a dozen people or the 2,500 people?
Um,
I know you said
Dude,
you're pretty comfortable. But which
yeah,
one maybe you had a little bit more butterflies kind of getting ready to go on stage for?
yeah, probably. I mean, in front of a bigger crowd for sure. And I think that was more from the standpoint of I'm using a microphone. Like I've never had to use a microphone before, and it's on a stage setting where lights, video, the whole thing, it's all on you. So that's a little bit more, a little more nerve wracking to start. We've done it a couple times now, so I've gotten a little bit more comfortable. But that's more nerve wracking than just being in a small room of people for sure.
Nice, man. Well, sounds like you're well on your way to being on a lot more stages. We're definitely have similar goals with that. But I do want to ask you one last question here. What is a tip that you give to somebody who's just trying to get started that are kind of similar to you, but maybe hasn't been on any kind of stage or any podcast or anything like that? What's a tip you'd give to them to help them get over that hurdle of being afraid to speak out?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is reminding yourself that you bring value, and some of that it comes back to an identity thing, and saying like I just believe that God's put something in my heart that's worth sharing, and so it's easier for me to share something when I know that God's put it in my heart, and if God put it there, then that means like it's something that other people can get value from. So that was an initial start for me, but then also practicing, right? I mean, you got to practice doing it somewhere, and sometimes
Mhm.
like that looks like doing Instagram stories and like recording yourself on video doing Instagram stories, and like, is it uncomfortable? Yeah. Like, you gonna do it good the first couple times? No, probably not. But at the same time, it builds some experience of having a camera in front of your face, being able to see yourself when you're talking, being able to effectively communicate in a short window of time. So I think those were great ways that I practiced along the way and helped me feel less nervous, so that by the time I got up in front of people, it was a little bit easier transition.
No, I love it. I appreciate the tips there and appreciate all the insight that you gave us here today, Josh. If people want to get to know you more, follow you, be able to ask you questions about money, where's the best place for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, either Facebook or Instagram. I'm pretty active on both, and that's just at Josh_Littauer. And that last name is spelled Littauer. So I'm sure it'll be in the show notes there somewhere. But
Yeah, I'll definitely have that
those are
there.
those are great places to reach out to me. And I'm super responsive in my DMs and stuff like that. So if y'all need anything, like, I would be more than happy to jump in and help. And again, I just appreciate you having me on, and I really like what you're doing. I think you've got a great thing going. So I'm excited to see where you continue to take not just this podcast, but continue your coaching and the things that you're doing for people. So I'm excited to see you continue to grow over the next few years.
Awesome. And we'll have to have you on again once you get that podcast going. So, and talk more about
Yeah,
that and what that journey looks like. So
yeah,
thanks for
absolutely.
coming on. I appreciate the time.
Awesome. Thanks, man.